Well, sure. So I was looking up there. They were talking about the other rooms. They had that C3 room, but I want to make clear that this is not the C3 room. So there may be some material that's not appropriate for children. So this panel, I was excited to be asked to interrogate or ask questions to the other panelists. As you mentioned before, I'm Steve Teles. I'm a professor of government and policy at Johns Hopkins University, our new school, which I think is part of a generation of building institutions that are designed to build, to create new things, to be willing to make significant criticisms of existing institutions in a way that a lot of higher education hasn't been. And I'm a senior fellow at the one and only Niskanen Center. I'm also increasingly old, and I say that because the project of WelcomeFest is in its way also old. When I was in college at GW in the late 1980s, I'm that old, I used to write the DLC and PPI to get them to send me Sam Nunn and Chuck Robb speeches. And I held on to my copy of Galston and Kmark's paper, The Politics of the Invasion, like it was a sacred document. And that said, I've become increasingly weary of the idea of centrism and moderation for some reasons that are not totally different than what the congressman just said. I now identify more with abundance and progress movements, and I think there's a lane for people like this in this room and on the stage, which I call civic abundance, about which you'll hear more, but I think of that as abundance for normies, abundance for people who represent the kind of districts that the members on this stage do. It's abundance for people who represent normal, middle-class, mostly suburban people in politically competitive places. For more details, you'll have to wait my book, Varieties of Abundance, next year, which hopefully will also lead you to Marshall Kosloff's podcast. I'm gonna try and see how many things on the little drinking thing you can get here today, but Marshall Kosloff's podcast, which dropped today, we talked about that. And so my embrace of progress and abundance as my banner of choice leads me to have three questions for the people here on this in this panel. And they come out of my observation that even now, democratic socialists are doing a better job competing for power in our party than we are. And we should take that challenge seriously. We should learn from it and not simply criticize it. And so first, question for everyone on the panel. One argument, and again, the congressman alluded to this, is that democratic socialists, whatever their flaws, and there are many, are at least proposing solutions at the scale of the problems faced by the United States. While moderates seem attracted to incremental, bite-sized solutions that seem so much smaller than our problems, right? Faced with a 10-foot climb, we always seem to only propose a 5-foot ladder. So I think abundance has some of these properly scaled answers, but could everybody in this panel please give me some examples of solutions that you think are appropriately at the scale of the problems we're facing and that can compete for agenda status with those that are being produced by our party's left?
Okay, I'll start. So I think it's worth pointing out that, even if democratic socialists and progressives are doing it under that banner, they are often more increasingly taking up abundance proposals. I think Mayor Mamdani obviously just released a housing plan, which was very abundancy. It was very supply oriented, had permitting reform and, and zoning reform and all of these various things. And so, I don't think we should be so upset that we are losing power if the democratic socialists are increasingly taking our ideas. And same in the, Congressman Harder just mentioned the housing bill that's moving through Congress. That's also a very abundancy idea, and one of the biggest champions has been Senator Elizabeth Warren. We've had disagreements with her on specific provisions of it, but nonetheless, it's still a very abundancy idea. And so, that's really some stuff to be very excited about. But I do agree with you that whereas abundance is very built out when it comes to housing and energy and government effectiveness, it is less built out on a lot of the other priorities that voters have, like healthcare and childcare, et cetera, that, some more progressives have answers to. But I do want to give a shout out to a project that Inclusive Abundance is doing, which is the Abundance Agenda. We're currently taking proposals for various, policies that can apply the abundance framework to those various areas. And so we can kind of build that out, meet the challenges of today.
Congressman?
Good to see everybody first. Welcome to WelcomeFest. This is great. I'm George, and Steve, thanks for your leadership on all this stuff. Amazing to be on a panel with the illustrious Congresswoman Bynum. I want to start by just saying I think abundance is really sort of the most exciting thing in American politics today, which is that it brings together such a wide range of different types of people and organizations, and that's why I had it be such an important part of my campaign, where we flipped the 27th district. And I think that there's no shortage of big ideas, right? We're going to spend order of magnitude $100 billion or more on the Iran war, maybe more, And imagine if we could take $100 billion and we split it into two pieces. $50 billion of which we do advanced purchase commitments for factory-built modular housing. That would jumpstart that and would potentially be a pathway towards radically decreasing the cost of housing in America, which hasn't changed. In fact, it's gone up over time in real dollars, over the course of the last 50 years. Second thing, it would be to do put $50 or $100 billion in a construction finance facility by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, low interest rate, which is a key part of the problem in building in America. And that would, each of those things could catalyze, I estimate, 500,000 to 1 million units every 2 years in America. So over the course of the next decade, we could produce, 5 or 10 million units, which is roughly the order of the problem that we have. So I think that there are big solutions. We need to think about those solutions, and I'm excited to work on them with all of the folks in this room.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Janelle Bynum here from Portland and Bend, Oregon. I approach the question from the perspective of a mom. I have 4 kids, 24, 22, 17, and 15. And I remember when I first started this, I was doing my first reelection, and my daughter, I think, was about turning voting age-ish. And she announced, because you had to pick, in Oregon we have motor voters, so you just automatically registered, and they send you a card, and they say, pick a party. And she hadn't picked a party, so she was kind of researching. And she was trying to pick a political philosophy. And she came home one day, and she was like, I know what I am now. I'm a DSA. I was like, oh, okay. All right. And around that same time, my son took his 8th grade trip to D.C., and he came back, and they buy whatever, and I found this MAGA hat under the bed. And I was like, okay. And then we had an election, and my husband was asking me, I was talking to him about how he was going to vote, just making sure that he did vote. We voted home, and I said, well, how are you going to vote on Measure 97 or something like that? And he was like, I don't know. Depends on how I vote on 98. Maybe I'll do yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, maybe yes. It just depends. And this is college educated, very smart man. And then I had one that just wanted to be adjacent to power. So these are the and one that would door knock with me. So that's the voter makeup in my house. So I have watched the oldest kid, kind of transition into young adulthood. And what I'm learning is that, the people of the DSA movement are illuminating the issues that we're seeing on the table right now. And I always ask every room, how many of you have kids who are still on the family plan? Come on, y'all. See, people are still on the family plan. The economics are still there. I still have that kid coming home every week, and she was just home on Sunday, with a whole shopping bag, going through my pantry, getting toilet paper, paper towels, crackers, lunch for the week. She's in grad school. And so people recognize what the economics are. Put a pin in that. Now wind it up, member of the sandwich generation. My mother calls me every day, has all sorts of opinion because she has all sorts of time. You need to tell Mike Johnson True story. You need to tell Mike Johnson that us old people have too much property and we're sitting on it because the tax policy does not allow us to release it. You need to tell him to raise the cap on capital gains for these real estate pieces that we have. So I told him. I did tell him. So to me, the question about DSA and any other ideal philosophy around here is a matter of, can you be practical and can you understand what is actually happening in American homes? I'm living it. I'm seeing it with the daughter shopping. We call her free 99 when she comes through the door. I'm seeing that every day. And then I'm seeing that on the other end where my mother's telling me our generation has too much real estate property. And that is one reason why young people just can't even pick off the market from what they need. So that's how I see it. It's a value proposition. And are we being realistic about what's happening in American homes today?
Right. So the second, I'm gonna keep on with these socialists. I'm gonna keep talking about them. The second question is that when I look at people in the DSA, I mean, one thing is they have a brand that people are aware of, right? So the fact that you have a kid who even has that in their mental kind of armature says something, right? That somebody did that. That didn't happen accidentally, right? So that happened because somebody organized and got out there. And when I look at people in DSA, one thing it notes is they at least get the idea that institutions in this country are broken, right? They have that sense that our job, and again, often people think of moderates as people who think things are basically okay, right? Who think of moderates as the people who are there to defend the institutions, which is a phrase we hear a lot. But when you talk to people all over the place, right? They think everything is broken, right? They think universities are broken, they think government is broken, they think everything, right, that are the big institutions of society are broken. And so I guess the question I wanted to ask everyone on the panel is, do you agree that basically the major institutions in this country are broken and need to be replaced wholesale? And if so, what would be an example of that? What would be an example of the kind of wholesale institutional remaking that we need in this country?
Okay, so yeah, I think that obviously our institutions are broken. I mean, I think that obviously voters are incredibly upset about it, as you've said, and but I think sometimes there's like a Democratic Party tendency to say this is Trump's fault. This is something kind of an aberration of the last 10 years and if we just kind of went back to pre-2016, somehow like everything would be fine again, and obviously that's not true. And I think this is kind of a core principle or like inspiring principle of abundance is that our institutions have been hollowed out by decades of kind of, too many rules, hobbling, kind of a lack of investment in our core institutions, especially government, and then our government's ability to help improve the other civic institutions in our society. And so I think that, yeah, I mean, that's like obviously just a very core aspect of abundance.
Congresswoman?
I think one of the things that's most exciting to me about abundance, as I've seen it play out in California and other places, is that it is a catalyst for different kinds of people to get involved in government, right? And part of the reason that we feel like these institutions are hollowed out is because the same old people are running them. And to see people from all different walks of life actually run for local city councils because they have gotten inspired about abundance or other types of things is really inspiring. And we've seen the difference that can make in local communities across the country. I think that clearly, I come from the space industry, and we have, a focus, we try to have a focus on mission there rather than process. Process is important, but I think what we see all across this country now is a focus on process rather than mission and rather than output or result. And I think what the American public is so hungry for is for a collection of public servants who are going to be focused on getting something done rather than following process or rules. And so I think that is going to be what drives people's hunger for abundance, is like this focus on outcomes. And then, of course, what we see, when we talk to the American public, people are totally fed up with the broken nature, not just of this White House, which is probably the most corrupt White House that we've ever seen, but also just the petty corruption that we see in everyday life. The fact that congressmen can still trade stocks, is, I think, something that I've fought against in Congress, and that, we need to stamp that stuff out, because that is a sort of just a sign of the endemic corruption within the system that we see all over the place.
Can I actually just ask one follow-up before we go to the Congresswoman about that, which is, how much do you think that the problems we see in the institutions, which you just described, mean that we need entirely new ones, right? Or how much confidence do you have that actually we can sort of get rid of procedure, get rid of what Jen Palka calls sort of the cruft in a lot of these systems, and that our existing institutions, both governmental, nonprofit, all those others, can actually work? Do we need to, focus more on reform or on building entirely new institutions like we do, all the time in the private market economy? But do we need that in government and nonprofit as well?
I don't know if it's possible to create like fundamentally new institutions in some of these things, but what we do need is, and what I hear a lot is from the Democratic base is, I hate Trump, but he's doing stuff, and the idea that, when we take power again, that we focus on just getting stuff done for the American people is this super strong desire. And I think a world in which we're held back by those institutions is a world where, we never get anything done for the American people, and we'll keep losing in that world.
Congresswoman?
So I grew up here in D.C., and I fell in love with a wonderful man from Oregon, and that's how I ended up in Oregon. People always ask. And what I have found is that growing up here made me a disruptor, a rule breaker. I'm an engineer by training, and engineers look at the laws of physics, but they're always trying something new. And I think my governing philosophy is that we don't defend the institution for the institution's sake. We defend the institution because it provides some level of stability, but we're always in constant reinvention of ourselves. And the people will defend the institution if it's working for them. So if it's not, they'll tell you. And I've also learned that from being a mom. The kids will tell you, that doesn't taste good. And they don't spare your feelings. And as consumers, as constituents, people will tell you, when I call Social Security and I have to wait 40, 50 minutes or I never get an answer, they're telling you it's broken. And so there's a difference, I think, in, I think of things in a business term, what DSA is able to produce and what the abundance agenda is able to produce. I would argue this: 100% of nothing is nothing, and 50% of a million is whatever 50% of a million is, half a million, right? So do you want the win or do you want the ideal? I'm going to take the win because I need the win to continue moving on. And that is what the people on the ground feel. They feel one like disruptive idea I just read, and this is kind of coming off of Clara Irick's call to me, is why can't people who rent write that off on their taxes just like people who have mortgages write that off on their taxes? Like, that's disruptive. And that might allow young people to save enough money for a down payment. And it gives credit to the rent that they're actually paying. Why are you having to pay rent and save money? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Can we push on the engineering point? Because this is actually a sort of regular theme in a lot of abundance writing, is the idea that a lot of our institutions are dominated by lawyers, right, and by proceduralism. And but to really get really big things done, you need the mindset of engineers. And one of the criticisms of Democrats is both when we were in power in the last administration, in the places that we still run, that there's not enough of that engineering spirit. So what would it look like to actually, and this is a good question for both of y'all, what would it look like to actually get more engineering spirit into the way that we were in government, and what's standing in the way? What do we need to get in the way, to get rid of to be able to get that engineering spirit?
First of all, it's very difficult to run as a middle-class person and be in Congress. I mean, my 15-year-old son is hustling me hard. He, wanted to stay out until 10 o'clock at night one night. And he was like, yeah, I needed to play in that game. I got to keep my body up. And I was just like, this is the sacrifice that we make as Congress people. We don't have enough help on one coast, and then you're trying to make decisions over here. And then you have people who are at the highest end of the economic spectrum. They're able to come here and do whatever they want. But a regular, average, ordinary person cannot afford to do this job. That's one piece of it. The other part is the job has to have some dignity, and you have to have some people with some morals and values. And right now, it feels like there's not enough of that.
Congressman, how do we get more mission orientation in our institutions?
So I think, here's two ideas. One is that we are not output focused in what we do in Congress, by which I mean we are overly process focused. So we do not say, right now, we have to create 5 million homes in America in the next 40 years or whatever. Right now we need to create, 100 gigawatts of power, production over the next 4 years. And then, Janelle is a better engineer than I am, but I come from the space industry, and what we would do is we would decompose that. In order to achieve that, we need to have, this amount of housing produced per year, and in order to do that, these are the ways that we produce housing, and this, we're going to have these people make that housing, and, if we're going to make it this much more, we got to make it this much this cost this much less. And that is a fundamental shift in how we would think about governance in this country, right? And I hope that we can move to that. One of the things that I was kind of shocked about when I came to Congress for the first time is that, wouldn't it be nice if we had the entire Congress sit down? I used to do this at my company, where you'd give everybody 5 or 10 Post-it notes, and, you'd allow people to put up what the biggest problem is in the country, and then you'd put, however many sticky notes you want to put up under that thing as your thing, and we just pick the top 5 things, and we just go solve those problems together, right? But we don't do that in Congress. I mean, it is not an institution that is focused on the mission of outputting solutions for the American people right now. And I hope that over time, with great folks like Janelle and Josh and others, that we can move towards that, because that's what the American people are hungry for. And when you see that happening, as I think you do, like in San Francisco now, and maybe a few other places across the country, people are so eager for that to happen, and it starts this dynamic, positive cycle of greater engagement, because they see that, shit, my schools are getting a little bit better now, or there is housing being produced. We can actually affect change in the system. And because I think that's what's driving people out of the system, is they don't feel the ability for the system to affect change. But when they see that it starts to affect change, and that's what inclusive abundance is all about, getting people involved so that they can, make a real change.
Yeah, just really quickly on that, and shouting out inclusive abundance, I'll also shout out our friends at Students for Abundance, who are right here. And again, woo, yeah, exactly. So one thing, again, to go back to our friends on the left, right? They are very good and very attentive to how you recruit people into politics, right? How you get them in high school or college, and then find ladders for them up into other kinds of activity. They're creating in lots of cities, they're creating clubs and places for people who share their ideology to get together and to scheme and conspire and do all that basic political stuff. Mostly with a few very important exceptions, that's not the thing we're good at, right? What do we need to do in order to bring more of the kind of people that the Congresswoman is talking about into politics originally, right? Get them at the beginning, make them see that they could have a career as builders of both of our movement and of government.
I think this actually touches on a point I forgot to make for your last question, which is I think that, you need to be able to show people a lot, DSA or just in general, progressives, as you said, are very good at showing, I feel your anger about this thing, about the fact that our, kind of broader society is broken. And then they kind of push a very specific kind of policy set, a set of solutions in response. I think that this is something where moderates and sometimes abundance people too go astray, is that we end up feeling like we are defending the status quo, a very broken status quo, and have kind of like no emotional juice behind us. It's like no palpable anger about the fact that things are broken. And I feel like it's like, we're seeing kind of a new crop of Democrats do a really good job of saying kind of, I am not, a democratic socialist, but I do feel your anger. I mean, we're seeing this with like Talarico in Texas. He's doing a good job, I think, of balancing these two things. And I think that, part of the way we can get more people involved is by kind of saying, a lot of people don't agree with some of the more lefty policy things, but really just are kind of looking for a political home, and we can provide that a lot more by showing kind of we feel people's pain. We did at Inclusive Abundance some message testing, some research with Blue Rose, where we looked at what are the most effective messages and kind of at reaching and persuading voters to vote Democrat in the House districts that are needed to win the majority. And we looked at, kind of traditional abundance messages, traditional populist messages, and then kind of like abundance with a populist flair, And what we found is the synthesis was the most effective. It was, not just we're not building enough and we need to lower your costs. It's we're not building enough, we need to lower your costs. And what little is being built is going to the wealthy first. And if you kind of combine the emotional part of abundance, I think that we could go a lot farther in recruiting people.
Yeah, the way I'll sharpen this for the last few minutes we have for the members of Congress is, again, the people in DSA, including members in Congress, right, very actively think about themselves as a faction, right? They describe themselves that way. They talk about themselves as doing collective action. They talk about themselves in some ways being the top of a movement that's much deeper than them. And often moderates tend to describe themselves as individuals, right? As people who represent some idiosyncratic philosophy, some particular place, but who we're not, electing them to go and work with these other people and make a project of their own, right? And so I guess the question to lead out in is, how can moderates in Congress and other kind of places work together less as individuals and more as a group who, when people vote, when they pull the lever for them, they say, I'm not just pulling the lever for you, I'm pulling the lever for you and you and you and a whole bunch of people who are going to go and take back both the Democratic Party and the country.
I think naturally, moderates are people who think of themselves as individuals, meaning I have my own mind. I'm going to vote the way I want to vote. I might be with you on one issue. I might not be with you on a different issue. And I think that independence is a hallmark of this country, and running with a pack. Like, I've never felt safe running with the pack. I've always felt like I'm a thoughtful, educated, warm person. And I think we need more thoughtful, informed people. And I'm proud to run with that crew. I don't need necessarily to be acknowledged by any particular group. And that partially probably is a function of being from Oregon now.
Yeah.
We're just kind of those free thinking people. And I think more of that is better. I don't want somebody that's shaped by their group and is afraid to step out of their group because that group will eat its own.
Congressman?
I think that, let's applaud for Janelle. That sounds awesome. Here's what I think. I think that we win the presidency with great ideas, and so part of the purpose of this group, I think, is to develop the armory of great ideas that will be picked up by the next Democratic nominee, and I hope that there are ideas that win. And I think that that's what really matters, is that if we have that standard bearer, that will redefine the party. And that will, I think, bring about a world in which the ideas that we care so much about are implemented at a national level. There's this interesting idea of strong floor, no ceiling. I really like this idea that it's kind of, we're going to have a social safety net, but we're going to encourage, Americans to succeed beyond their wildest dreams, or as much as that they can. And I think that is a idea that is appealing to people that in a way that is different than what maybe some of the left side of our party are selling.
You want to take us out?
Yeah, sure. So before doing this job, I worked as the communications director for Governor Laura Kelly, the governor of Kansas. And I think I'm actually not a believer that like moderates need to, I mean, it'd be great if maybe there's more organization, but I think something that's a real great thing about a place like Welcome or, you know, some of these other more moderate groups is it's more about providing cover to Democrats who need to run with the party, but take positions that are different from like kind of democratic norms. And so, you know, I experienced this in Kansas. It is very helpful. You know, we had to break with the party all the time in order to win. It is just useful for more groups like that, like Searchlight and or the Bench and Third Way to provide that cover. So for instance, like Talarico, I saw just embraced oil and gas. That's not a standard Democratic position, but very necessary to do to win in Texas. And I think that it'd be helpful if more groups are providing that cover, pushing against kind of the interest groups that tend to push the party to the left in a way that is unhelpful for winning elections, rather than, I don't know if I think that kind of like the investments in door knocking or like, you know, all of that is very important, but more kind of like providing political cover for some of those candidates is helpful.
All right, so they have told us that we are done. So I want to thank you and thank Congressman Whitesides and Congressman Bynum.